Okay.
Good, how are you?
Infiltrated so bad.
Did you think about hiring someone from?
It cost. Serve everyone.
So I will not be here 4 weeks from today. For the 21st.
I don't want to dump
It
trailers.
will be 5 before that. So that's right. We don't have one next week. So I'll be gone for the 28th.
When more coming? Yeah.
President Johnson will be in.
I thought-
Done in an hour like we did last time.
Right. That's my world. How I get myself into these things.
I was amazed at some of those things. I wasn't. You didn't have to stop anyway.
That's the adventure was. Yeah, it went smooth. I expected it to be a lot longer.
Yeah, I did.
How are you guys? I'm just as surprised as everyone. I'm gonna say something. Look at the hubris.
Kristen, are you able to hear us?
Really hard.
Okay, good. We'll cut down on the background noise here. I think we ought to get started because we have three members. Well, we have 2 members absent and 1 on the phone. So, let's start our usual way. Anything that happened last Tuesday that we need to follow up on, or that we left undone, or public comment that we need to address? Anything standing out? Okay. All right, we're already 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So, the next item on the agenda is the 214 South Walcott license issue. Carter, can you start us on that?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are aided tonight with regard to the exhibit in the TV screen there, right in front of us, with regard to what is being proposed. This particular address is where the Backwards Distillery is proposed to be located. This is the address where the old bamboo place used to be. It's owned by Mr. Talbert and his family, his companies. The code requires that some sort of landing on level, if you will, with the doors be constructed in order to safely remove the public from the doors that you see here in question. The difference with
Can I
regard...
just interrupt for a second,
Yes,
just to
please.
explain to everyone?
Mhm.
The starting point of all of this is that the doors are about 5 inches above the sidewalk. That's the problem.
That's correct. And with regard to the doors now being required to open over the sidewalk pursuant to the new application that this building will be used for, the challenge lies in the idea of how the public gets out without, tripping off the doorstep and running into the public coming from either side, and potentially dealing with ADA issues as well. The code would suggest that a sort of gradual mounded facility be built into the sidewalk that would have to taper outward toward the street and outward away from the sides of the door as well, which from our standpoint creates kind of an obstruction in the entire pedestrian walkway adjacent to the building. The proposal that Mr. Talbert is suggesting is just along the lines of what you see here. More of like a deck structure with a railing that provides very clear division from the area where the public would be coming in and out of the building and the traveling public along the sidewalk corridor there adjacent to the structure being proposed. In order to make that happen though, and have that facility be built, the city would need to consider 2 things to have happen. One, an agreement with the property owner that would effectively lease that space of the public corridor from the city for their private use, so to speak. The other thing that would have to take place is a slight change in the ordinance to accommodate a use of the public space in this nature that would make all this happen and provide for this alternative to what the code currently requires. My feeling is that this is a better solution with regard to not only conveying traffic out of the building and into the building, but also conveying the walking public adjacent to the area in question. And so I would support this if council is okay with the idea of allowing the public space to be used in a different fashion, and of course, putting an ordinance together that would make for something like this to occur. What I would like to do is get your blessing with regard to the concept, if that's the case, and then in tandem with that, I would like to let Mr. Talbert know so that he can tie the work needed here in with existing work that's taking place out in the street that he's responsible for in order to do other things that the building needs accommodations for, and ratify those decisions with regard to an issuance of a license in the next appropriate formal meeting, and of course, changing the ordinance in such a way that these kind of things can be accommodated.
If I could just add from our
Please.
conversations, as John has pointed out, it's not a small matter to allow private business to essentially control public space. And so there are precedents we have to be concerned about as far as other people making a similar request. And I think the key element here is that we have decided that this is a safety issue if it isn't done in this way. And that would be the main criterion against which we would measure any future requests, rather than I just want some of the sidewalk, since you gave some of the sidewalk to backwards. Or some of the sidewalk in front of my place, since you did it for them. There would have to be a strong safety issue. So, any questions, comments about doing this, Steve?
Well, I'll just make a comment. I went over and talked to Lou about this, and I like the way he's got it proposed in doing this with the railing and whatnot, because of the fact that if you just mount that up, those doors still come out. Somebody still could potentially get hit by those doors when they're walking by. And this certainly sections that off to where, you have the railing that separates people coming out of those doors from the traveling public. So I'm behind this. I wouldn't be behind a mound at all. I think you're still gonna have that safety issue with those doors opening outward without having this rail system in there, so I'm all for this.
Plus, people would be walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden the sidewalk would have a grade to it, and that's,
Right.
people could trip very easily. Any other concerns, Kent?
Out of curiosity, you said you went and looked at it?
Mm-hmm.
It just came to my mind, with it being mounded, water runoff from snow, rain, whatever, where's that water gonna pool up at? Will it go into do you think it'll go into the streets? Do you think with the way the sidewalk is, it'd go into a sidewalk and could potentially, if it froze, turn into a ice skating rink there? Out of curiosity, or does that
Mr. Mayor, we would ask that it would be designed in such a way that it would allow for the runoff to take place in sheet basically across the sidewalk, like we try to design most of the sidewalks to sort of spill into the adjacent gutter, so.
If the sidewalk has the correct grade, then
Yes.
it'll shed.
That would be the hope, yep.
Mike?
I just want to say that I'll refrain and abstain from any consideration or voting on this for personal contact reasons.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward.
Okay, are we good? Okay,
Very good. So with that, Mr. Mayor, can I give Mr. Talbert the
are we all okay with that?
Yep.
work approval? Okay, very good. We will do that. Thank you.
You wrote this, so you're good with it, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sneak peek ass curtain.
Did Christine hold her thumb up? I'm curious.
Kristen?
Oh, Kristen.
Oh, sorry. Kristen, are you okay with this conversation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You'll have, just butt in, because I'm, sometimes need reminding. So, okay, on to the next item. The Flat River Trails Trust.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have the opportunity to consider some additional projects with regard to savings that the Platte River Trails Trust have been able to incur from the original allocation that council authorized with the 1 cent 15 allocation of what I understand to be originally at $764,000. Council's probably aware that the Casper Mountain Phase 3 project did not move forward with regard to the funding for that project not coming forward that was supposed to accompany the 1 cent funding to make that happen. And so the majority of those funds are now able to be provided and allocated towards other projects. And so council requested that Ms. Emery come in tonight and visit with the council and walk through the ideas that her board has as to how to use those residual funds from the 1 cent 15 allocation.
Thank you for helping me, Jolene. Are we ready?
So Kristen, we're about to look at the PowerPoint that I think you had a chance to look at in the packet.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor Powell, members of council. Thank you so much for this opportunity to come speak to you today. My name is Angela Emery. I am the Executive Director of the Platte River Trails Trust, and I'm joined tonight by my Vice President, Vice Chair of the Board, David Huff, and Bruce English, former Board Chair. As many of you may know, we are a nonprofit 501c3 citizen-led organization. We've been a partner with the City of Casper since 1982, and we regularly and have for many, many years applied for optional 1 cent funds to do the work that we do. So as Mr. Napier indicated, the Platte River Trails Trust was originally allocated $767,000 and 1 cent number 15 funding for trail-related projects. As Mr. Napier indicated, the Casper College to Rotary Park project was at the top of our list. And when we submitted our 1 cent application, the engineer's estimates for phase 1 and 2 were approximately $1.5 million. This was back, the engineer's estimates date to 2014 and the application was 2015. As you all may remember very well, 2015 saw a very severe downturn in our economy in Wyoming and in Natrona County in particular. If there was any bright side to that, it was that the bidding environment changed significantly for us for the better. So contractors were eager to submit, they needed work, and the bids came in significantly lower on phase 1 and 2 than we had anticipated. So a total cost for phase 1 and 2 was a little over $1 million. Of that $1 million, $749,000 came from the YDOT TAP grant program. $162,900 came from optional 1 cent number 15 funds, and the Platte River Trails Trust privately raised $154,900 for phase 1 and 2. So in addition to completing phase 1 and 2, Casper Mountain Road project, we were also able to complete reconstruction of one of our oldest sections of the river trail. The construction began below the overlook shelter and went about 3,000 lineal feet to the east. So this is the completed new trail here, wide, 10-foot wide trail, as you can see here. Ooh, there we go, we'll work up there. At any rate, a nice 10-foot wide trail replaced the one that was quite a bit older. So we are here today to talk to you about the $541,000 we have left of optional 1 cent funds that were allocated to the Platte River Trails for trail-related projects. I'd like to just point out, and many of you are probably aware, that the Casper Metropolitan Planning Organization is in the process of updating their long-range transportation plan. And as a part of that update, they have asked the public to fill out surveys. And of the respondents, 68% of respondents want to make it safer and more comfortable to walk and bike in Casper. 66% of the respondents think walking in the Casper area would be better if there were more sidewalks and trails. And so we have some plans to help that come about. Let me back up and say, we realized we were going to have this surplus left over in 2018, and at the end of 2018, City of Casper staff and the Platte River Trails Trust Board began to really put our attention towards what was most needful in our community, what were the most important walking and biking needs. I'd like to thank City of Casper staff for being intimately involved in that process. So here's our plan that we've come up with. First of all, you have approved, we applied for a grant to the YDOT TAP program to create a trail from Murad Park to the CY Walmart parking lot, and I'm going to show you some renderings of these projects in a moment. The financial picture here is that YDOT will pay for $275,000 of the project. One set number 15 funds at $55,000 will be the match. We would like to do more renovation of the river trail. Many of the sections of the river trail are 25 plus years old. David Huff was just telling me that some of the sections here, what year were they, David?
93 and 94.
So we're talking about over 25-year lifespan, which is pretty long, but they're needful and they're highly used. So we would like to address some of those oldest sections of trail. We'd also like to work on some connectivity issues in town, one of them being a better connection between the Durbin Street bike lanes and the Casper Mountain Road Trail. I don't know if any of you have observed how popular the Casper Mountain Road Trail is, but making that transition from the Durbin Street bike lanes to the trail is just not as comfortable and safe as it could be. So you'll see an allocation here for that. We would also like to direct some funds to wayfinding along the trail system. Platte River Trails is a part of a community-wide committee that's working on wayfinding, not only on trails, but on streets and the highway, really community-wide. We feel like improving our wayfinding will make it easier for people to use the trail, and both people that live in town and people who visit us here. And finally, we have some money set aside here as well to make a connection from North Casper, Matt Campfield Park to Wells Park. And I'd like to show you now some renderings of all of these projects. So this is the Murad Park to Walmart project. Let's see if my little thing will work. It won't work here on this.
Kristen, are you able to follow this okay? I think we're on slide 20 now, if I'm following.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So the trail will branch off from the bypass trail, the newer loop trail in Murad Park, and it will go up the hill at an ADA approved slope and come out here and be crossing the signalized crossing there leading into the Walmart shopping center. We will then follow the road, be adjacent to the road leading into the shopping center, and follow the sidewalks. There'll be some upgrading to some of the sidewalks, and we'll terminate. This is showing Plaza Drive. We hope to get all the way to Talon Drive. This is a project that we hope will eventually lead all the way into the neighborhoods there, including Fort Casper Academy, so the Wolf Creek neighborhood. We get a lot of feedback from people in that area that it's challenging for them to get to the river trail, and they'd like to be able to get their children safely there. River trail major maintenance. So this rendering shows you the two sections that we intend to work on. This is F Street, heading east towards where our reconstruction project began last year. And then over on the far east side, we'll travel from the pedestrian bridge to Bryan Stock Trail with a little dog leg section leading back to M Street. And then finally, this is a rendering of the connection here from the Durbin Street bike lanes to the Casper Mountain Road Trail. What we're hoping to do is increase some of the sidewalk width here. Some of the sidewalks are still 5 feet wide. We'd like to expand them to be 10 feet wide. We'd also like to install a 10-foot wide trail there in Armory Park. We realize that Armory Park is owned by Casper College, so it is our intent to connect with the college and hopefully this will be a project that they feel is important. They certainly do seem to be using the trail on Casper Mountain Road quite a bit. I'd just like to end by thanking city staff again for their help. We are really a partner to the city, Platte River Trails. We're here to work on non-motorized transportation, connectivity, and make Casper a great place to walk and bike. We're here tonight to get your approval to move forward on these projects that we've identified. We were given funding, number 15, to work on trail-related projects, and we hope that you find these projects attractive and will give us the thumbs up to move forward.
Questions for Angela? Ken?
One, thank you for that, and looking at the finances and looking where you can allocate it into our city, that's awesome. So you completed phase 1 and 2 for the Casper Mountain Trail, right?
Correct.
What was phase 3? What was that consistent
Phase
of, if
3,
you don't mind me asking?
sure. Well, let me back up and say that because of the better bidding environments, we were able to get a little further with phase 1 than we thought we were, and a little further with phase 2. So the last remaining segment was really only about 3/4 of a mile, heading really into the road leading up to Rotary Park. So 3/4 of a mile. It was some challenging topography. However, so it was about a roughly $400,000 project, I think. But we did apply twice for a YDOT TAP grant for this project, and were denied both times. Don't know that the TAP grant program felt it was the best example of working on connectivity in a community. And as you all may realize as well, some of the citizens that live near Rotary Park are fairly vocal about not wanting more usership there. I don't know if that might have played a role in the denial.
And are you still looking at gonna continue to proceed forth to
That's a
complete
great
it?
question. That's a great question. Not at this time. People that are on bikes that are gonna go up there probably will be intrepid enough to leave the trail and go on up for the last 3/4 mile on the side of the road, as they have done for many, many years. It's unfortunate. We thought that we could get there, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen for us in the next foreseeable future.
It's too bad.
Any other questions for Angela?
Mr. Mayor. Angela, with regard to the Robertson Road Bridge connectivity and so forth on the west side there, in the spreadsheet you indicate, at least imply, that that's potentially a future project.
Right, so we were allocated number 16 1-cent funds for the connection from Paradise Valley to Robertson Road via the bridge there. So that is a project that was just recently funded, and we're waiting to sign our contract with the city, and we hope to engage a consultant to start the design of that project this summer. We feel like that is a project that will be a gateway to the west side of town that does not exist now. So kids that live on Robertson Road can ride safely off street all the way downtown and to the soccer complex.
So you are anticipating using 1 cent 16 for that?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
yes, sir. And we're just waiting for, the contract to be signed, and we'd like to get started on hiring the consultant this summer. And then we will apply for YDOT TAP funds as the primary funding source. They're using the number 16 as a match.
So essentially, Angela, you're asking us to give you a thumbs up to spend the money that's already been allocated, but spend it on different projects that.
That's correct.
Because
We're
it
here
was-
today to tell you we did a better job than we had anticipated, so we have some surplus, and we'd like to use them on some different projects.
Any other questions?
I think it's great.
You guys did a great job.
Thank
course.
you. Thank you for your partnership.
Okay. On to the events, Casper Events Center lighting project.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just to be real clear with regard to the discussion that we have tonight pertaining to the event center. We indicated to council a couple weeks ago that we plan to come back and visit with all of you about improvements that we want to make at the event center. That, in my estimation, was more in line with regard to the 1 cent 16 projection for funds in the event center. This is a discussion with regard to using current funds, 1 cent 15 funds and whatnot, to make some of these projects happen that we would like to visit with you tonight. So we still owe you a part 2, if you will, of the event center discussion. We are not ready for that discussion this evening, but rather how it relates to funding the LED lighting project at the event center. The primary impetus with regard to this project is the ability to take advantage of power discounts that we would incur when we make the right capital investment up at the event center. And so with that in mind, we are hopeful that we can allocate monies from projects that you have approved in the past that we have considered in regards to this possibility, and hopefully get your blessing to move forward and make that capital improvement happen and start those discounts as quickly as we can. Council approved in the past the box office compliance and security upgrades, the summit and banquet pull-down gates, and we're hoping that with regard to looking at those two projects a little differently, we can shore up the funds necessary to make the LED project come to reality. With the box office compliance project and security upgrades, we do think that we can save about half of the cost of that project with regard to the fact that we have determined and learned that indeed the glass will not need to be replaced and that it is already tactical glass, if you will, and bulletproof, so to speak, and will likely not need to be replaced. And so we think that will generate an improvement in the price of about $15,000. In comparison to the LED lights project, we think that the banquet pull-down gates are not as high a priority, and we would like to defund that project and maybe consider it at a future time, and rather turn those funds over to the LED project, which in total would bring about $140,000 forward with regard to the funds that we think we can set aside for the LED lights. I've asked Mr. Cortez to entertain any questions that you might have that would hopefully lead to your favorable approval and allow us to move forward and make those enhancements happen.
Questions for Carter or for Tim? Maybe I missed it, Tim, but how much are we gonna save every year with this new lighting?
It calculates out to about a 5-year payback on electrical costs alone. So just kind of give you a ballpark figure, we spend about $5,000 a month just in utilities up at the event center for both heating and electricity. So it adds up quick.
Other questions? You guys are a quiet group tonight. Ken?
Is LED lighting all for the inside of the event center, or are we talking about LED inside and the parking lot and stuff?
That's a good question, Councilman, Mr. Mayor. It just covers the arena floor is all we're doing.
The arena floor.
So
okay.
not even like the administration spaces or stuff like that, but where we see that huge amount of cost is doing the arena floor because it's kind of an on-demand charge and it takes a lot of electricity when we need to put it on for a show. So it's strictly just that arena floor.
Other questions? Everybody okay with this plan? I guess we're good to go.
Awesome.
Hey,
Thank you.
Charlie.
Kristen?
Sorry, just really quick. Did you guys say it was a 5-year payback on the LED lighting?
Yeah. That's what Tim said.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's move forward. Park fees resolution.
Mr. Mayor, I might have Tim remain standing with regard to this concept that ultimately would require your approval in resolution form, and so if I could defer to Mr. Cortez, if it would please the council.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, this is a kind of a housekeeping resolution, really. Some of you've been on council before will recollect we do bring these kind of almost on an annual basis. What you'll kind of find in this is that we're not looking for any increase in fees aside from one, which is to increase the extension for the band shell from $400 to $500, and that's just based on what it truly costs us to make that modification to the band shell, which happens about once or twice a year, and it only affects the Wyoming Symphony Orchestra. So we reached out to them and said, hey, this is why and what it would go to. They made their budget adjustment there. Good with that fee increase. The other fees you'll see are remaining the same, or they're actually backing down a little bit from what was previously allocated, and that's because of just the size of the shelters or the facility itself, and we're just trying to get everything in the same bucket, if you will. And then the rest of the resolution revolves around removing some language with regard to 4-hour blocks and such, and that's because what we found is reality doesn't match up so well with our software that books these things as people go online and books our shelters and such. So we're removing that feature, if you will, but like I said, it's kind of more just aligning things with reality and the user experience of getting online to do that. With that, I'll entertain any questions that you may have for me.
Questions for Tim? Right?
When was the last time we raised the fan shell fee? Has it been quite a while? It's been quite a while.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it has been a little while, and like I said, the only fee that we have is because of this extension that we put on, which was requested by those folks to be able to put all their members, if you will, on stage at once. So there, I want to say it was a year ago we increased the fee, but it was because of that,
Right.
not because of just increasing the fee for the same facility, if you will.
Ken?
I'm trying to find my, I got one, I know, but I had another one. Adding fees for the horseshoe pits or the volleyball court, the sand volleyball court, is it utilized or requested that much to benefit from adding fees to it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, great question. We really don't know yet because both of those features, actually one of them still under construction, which is the volleyball court fees, or volleyball court, and that's in Washington Park, and we'll actually get a chance to discuss that here in a minute. But the horseshoe pits actually went in last year as well. So up till now we haven't charged any fee, but like I said, both features are very new or under construction.
People can use it unless they wanted to do like a competition, then they would have to, but in order to use it, they don't have to request the.
Great question, Mr. Mayor,
right.
Councilman. That is correct. It is a public facility. You can go use it. The only time you want to reserve it is if you have like a tournament or something for your folks or your party that you want to make sure that no one else comes in and uses it while you want to use it. So that is the only time that a park shelter fee or a lot of the fees that you'll see in here, it is free so long as you don't want it for specific time and for your party.
Gotcha.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then the only other question I have is, and maybe it was in there and I missed it, and I apologize if I did. The eliminating deposit for Wells Park and Crossroads, Havilon. Why is that? I didn't see that in there, but maybe I missed it.
Good question, Mr. Mayor, Councilman. That is because we don't have any way to regulate it. Meaning, if somebody puts a deposit on those particular facilities, and then they did something to mar up the picnic table or something, we don't have staff that goes back in right after to say, hey, this damage was done by that party. And without that enforcement piece or that way to kind of prove that it was that person, we think it would be unfair to charge a deposit because we really have no way, in fact, of them telling them that they were the ones that caused the damage to begin with. If that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Basically, Tim, the permits serve the purpose of someone who wants to make sure that it's available for them they lock it down and they know it's there for them. They don't have to wait or hope that it's gonna be open. It's just gonna be there for them.
Mr. Mayor, that is entirely correct. And I would add that one piece I forgot to mention is that some of the housekeeping that I mentioned with regard to this is to get it in line with our special events guide, which has just recently been adopted by the city. So little bit of language there.
Pretty minor changes, really. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I like the idea of eliminating that 4 hour. Good call on that, I think.
Okay, we good with this, everyone? Thumbs up? Okay, great. Okay,
Thumbs up.
okay, thank you, Kristen. And now on to dog parks.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have a couple of discussions that are kind of at play here tonight. One of which is the direction we need from council with regard to whether or not these facilities should be expanded in terms of the number of facilities that we have available currently. We certainly have talked quite a bit about the idea of creating a park over there by the oncology area, which is sort of the eastern end of East 2nd Street. And we've even identified funding that has been set aside for a recreational application, if you will, in that particular area, and that is demonstrated here on your screen. The number that has been set aside, you'll probably recall, is in the neighborhood of $100,000. I'm hoping that if indeed you do decide to move forward, that we can keep those improvements within that range, if you will. That certainly is up to council. We talked about the last time we visited on this matter whether or not that amount of fencing is necessary. We've talked about whether or not we should establish some parking area in the vicinity. We've also talked about whether or not you would be interested in other features and assets that this facility would incorporate. We're hopeful that that direction can be established tonight if council is up for that. The other side of the conversation that we need some direction on is whether or not council would like to see, as Councilman Bates put it, I think it's a good descriptor, kind of a grassy area dog park. One of the examples that was bantered about was with regard to the potential of using portions of Paradise Valley, that park, and we've kind of ginned up a way in which that park could be created. This happens to be more on the northeast side of the park that is largely underutilized right now. In fact, it's more of a rough mowing area, isn't it, Tim, in that park? The advantage that this area provides is that it's encircled by trails right now that are improved and in good shape and certainly used a lot by folks and would serve as a nice perimeter, but may not be the kind of area that you would expect when you want to throw a ball with a dog, for some 50 yards or whatever, I don't know. So from that standpoint, may not be the most ideal, but certainly a good spot for a recreational area generally. Staff even suggests that a pond in the shape of a dog bone might be warranted. I tend to wonder.
You gotta have fun with these, Carter.
Yeah, that's right.
Is this like a Friday afternoon project?
Just about. Just about. The advantage that I like with regard to this exhibit is it does provide you a pretty good feel with regard to a menu of options that you could consider, not only for Paradise Valley, but other areas throughout town in sort of a grassy area that you can generally expect the cost to include. With the major difference being with regard to this particular park, if indeed you want to put in, say, what they call dog-friendly grass, that stuff's kind of expensive, and you may not need that entry in the other areas that we would potentially have by way of direction from you. We also looked at Washington Park as an area that indeed could be one of those candidates for a grassy area dog park. As you can see here, the area that we are currently considering for the outdoor volleyball court may serve really nicely as a dog park area, because indeed you do have that length and acreage, if you will, for throwing the ball inside the park and having the dogs sort of run in that regard. We also understand that this area is not currently utilized by other user groups for programming and so forth. That tends to become a concern in many of the other areas that we have, grassy area and large expanses of flat field type area. We're worried that if we consume those with dog park uses, you might get pushback from other user groups that depend upon that space in their seasons and those kinds of things. This is simply an idea. The question for you tonight is, what direction do you want to go with that kind of an expansion? If you'd like to see a grassy area designated for dog park uses, we've given you a couple ideas, really just meant to sort of spurn some thought maybe, with some potential cost estimates as well. But truthfully, the decision is yours to make. We're hopeful we can get that direction. I have suggested in the past that, given council's reticence for funding a quad lift design, those funds could be used to apply to a facility of this nature, whether in part or in total. Of course, that's up to you as well. I would say that, looking for projects that cost more than that $250,000, we would probably have to go back to the drawing board and bring back some recommendations for you to consider in that regard. Beyond that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I've asked Tim to prepare some other comments to give to you for additional thoughts that you might have as you deliberate these ideas. But again, if council's ready to give us some direction tonight, we'd gladly take it, and we'd incorporate it into our capital plan to prepare for delivery to you in May. If you'd like to deliberate further, that's fine too. But we're prepared to go whatever direction you'd like to see this take. And so if I could defer some time to Mr. Cortez, Mr. Mayor, that'd be helpful.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Carter did a pretty good job of setting the table there. One thing I would like to say about this one before we move off it, which is Washington Park, you can see this 0.83, that's acreage, so that's where that, and then this just over $12,000 is just the fencing, 6-foot high fence, vinyl coated fences. That's about what it would cost us to do it. And then the amenities, if you will, I flip back to this slide to kind of give you a menu, but when Carter said that, this is an area that's not heavily utilized, I would probably leave it at that, meaning there is a Friends of Washington Park group that's a pretty vocal group, and they care about their park deeply, and we haven't confronted them with this idea either, that we might still see that pushback that we really wouldn't want to see in a case like this, because if you really want to get a taste of what goes on in our community and our parks, right now is a great time to drive around our community, because you will see our spaces being utilized like you don't see it normally, meaning there's kids playing baseball and practicing and stuff like that in these places that you normally wouldn't think that they are at. And then it's not even fair to go now, because there's a seasonal nature to a lot of the spaces that we have. Midget football fires up in the fall, and a lot of these spaces that are smaller that you think are really not being utilized. You'll see these kids, their team practices held on these fields. So I think that's why you see this slide pared down, the slides pared down in the manner that you do. Carter is totally right that we can plop them wherever you really want. And so the direction is kind of what's important, I think, for me and my staff tonight. The acreage, I want to point that out, is very important, because as we read through documents, there's not a whole lot of expertise in dog parks these days, because it's really a new front-running type topic. But what we have found is that acreage is a concern, because what does it make it worthwhile? We could carve out little pads the size of this room all over the community, but people will just come back and say it's not usable to me. I want to throw my ball for my golden retriever. So we want to put something in that's sufficient to meet the need. So what you do see there standard-wise for now is people really say anything smaller than a half acre probably doesn't really get you where you want to be. And then there are some communities that say really an acre is where we want to be or larger. So that's just something for you to kind of mull around a little bit. We didn't touch on this slide though, but this is the rec center, ice arena. And this is an area that, once again, is probably utilized, but not, we don't see it heavily utilized. And the grass is not like that plush stuff that we see throughout a lot of our other parks. So that's why we throw it up as a good candidate. But just for reference, this area that we kind of carved out here would be about 2 acres. Just kind of give you a frame of reference. You know, this one, we already went over. I think this is a great one for as far as a menu of stuff. The grass that Carter was referring to is it is a synthetic, kind of like AstroTurf, if you will, but it is something that's made for pets. It is high dollar, meaning this area that we see that we want to do in that artificial grass will run you just over $500,000. But what you do find in the literature is you talk about communities and even our own that have grassy area dog parks, and maybe even Angela could speak to that as well, would be is dogs are hard on natural turf, meaning it won't take you long with a high use area for it to really not look that great or become kind of a dusty, dirty area, and then it rains and then it becomes a mud hole. And so I mean, it is not just a set it and forget it type operation. It definitely is a lot of maintenance. I will tell you, my office, we probably field 20 to 1 phone calls, dog parks versus just a regular park, meaning we don't really have any complaints to speak of, thankfully, on our parks. But dog parks are a totally different animal. Pardon.
What kind of complaints, Tim, are you talking about?
For dog parks?
Yeah.
We get everything from like a certain kind of, pea gravel wood chips here, stuff from the footing that their paws get on, and they say, that we didn't really like that turf or lack thereof. The gravel tears up my dog or gets stuck in between. We got a lot of stuff about as far as cleanliness. Of course, dog owners are supposed to pick up after their dogs, but they don't. So that falls on us, and we try to get around as much as we can, but it's difficult. They are highly used, the ones that we do have in our community, which is great. The downside is that they do create an awful lot of maintenance. This is an interesting slide I want to point to as well. Raleigh, North Carolina is kind of a front runner in the nation right now as far as dog park discussion. And so we've just been paying attention to what they've been kind of putting out. And one of their metrics was that a body much like yourselves probably decided was they decided they want a dog park within 10 minutes of every incorporated area of their city. That's kind of what they use as a benchmark. Fire department, we use it for 4 minutes, and so I just kind of gravitate towards the metric that kind of helps me decide like which kind of direction we need to be in. But what you'll see here is we have the 3 current dog parks that we have, which is Lake McKenzie, which is just over by the soccer complex, Morad Park, which we're all pretty familiar with, there at the intersection of Wyoming and CY, and then the Tate Pump House, which is overseen by the Platte River Trails Trust. And so we did a study of how long what park would cover you within 10 minutes, and that's what these lines, I realize it's kind of a busy, but it kind of juts out in certain areas, because you jump on Wyoming Boulevard, you can cover a lot of ground quickly. But you can see like Morad, for instance, covers all this green area for a 10-minute drive. Basically, if you wanted to use a metric like this, it would tell us that our dog parks, by Raleigh, North Carolina standards, is adequate. Meaning we cover every area of the city as it currently sits. So, with the addition of something on the east side, you obviously get a lot further out, and you might get a lot more folks. But anyways, I guess I just throw it in there more for a discussion point. If this body were to decide on a metric like that, maybe 10 minutes is too far, and you say, well, we want to be within 8 minutes, and we could go back to the drawing board and kind of get that. If you were to all say, well, we think half an acre's plenty big enough, a quarter acre or larger, that'd be fine. We would take that direction and come up with some other ideas as well. So, I guess I would probably leave it at that, Mr. Mayor.
I think Ray had a question, and we'll get to you, Mike.
So this may be a loaded question, Tim. Do you think we need more dog parks? I don't mean to put you on I don't mean to put you there.
But you just did.
You asked and I'm going to answer it. But Mr. Mayor, Councilman, if you recall, I was asked that very question by Councilman Walsh.
Right.
When first iteration of kind of this discussion, and I'd probably say no, we probably don't need more dog parks, but I don't, you know, you all represent the constituents and you probably get that feedback in a different way than I do. I don't have people that are like upset about the lack of dog parks. I think that there are a lot of people in our community who would like to see more because it could offer different amenities and maybe a closer venue for them to go to, but if you were to ask me based on anecdotal and kind of data I've seen right now, I would say no.
I think that's where I was coming from, kind of a follow-up. So my follow-up would be then, we're looking at it, and I know this was, the impetus behind this was because of the leash law. We were thinking, oh, we better try to have another place where we can have dogs. And so, I mean, if we're adequate, I mean, I know, and I'm only gonna speak for myself, I haven't gotten any feedback from anybody in Ward 3 unless Steve has, but any feedback from them saying, oh my gosh, we need more dog parks. So I'm just curious on that, just was wanting to know, so.
Well, I don't have questions so much as a couple of comments. Sitting in this chair, I think if former Councilman Laird was here, he would turn to Sunday, and Sunday would say, yes, they need more dog parks. I talked to Wagner about this last night, and she agrees that we need more dog parks. But having said that, you know, and it is good that that you can drive there and that close to the thing. I think that, you know, ideally in my mind, I'd like to see a dog park a doggy area in each one of our parks, actually. Now, I know some of them are so small that wouldn't work, but I agree with the concept of moving forward with these things. I am not ready to give up on the lift design at Hogadon, and so I don't look at that as a funding source. But you know, I am hesitant about the idea of, and I'm going to use a term here that might sound like I'm being more critical than I am, of Christmas treeing these things up with a lot of amenities in them. I think that, you know, I've been in a lot of communities where there's the dog park and it's just part of the park that they fenced off, and it's getting a lot of use and people are in there using it and everything, and they don't, you know, they haven't dolled it up with a bunch of other stuff. And so I'm a little bit reluctant, you know, to install all the really cool stuff, you know, but you guys did do a great job designing it. I love the pond.
Steve? Well, two things. So on the far east side, there's 100,000 that is there earmarked for that park, et cetera. And the discussion that we had, I believe, before was fencing the entire thing, which I don't think needs to be done. If you can get away with a half acre to an acre, then I would suggest that we use some of those funds just to section that off as a dog park, and then whatever's available after that, put parking and whatnot, just to make that a functional park. My other question would be, of the three that are existing now, do you know roughly what the sizes of each of those are?
I don't recall the Tate Pump House. Just driving by it, I would say it's probably around 1/3 of an acre.
Yeah, that's not very big.
It's not very big. Maybe 1/3 to a half. And Morad runs around 5 acres. It's a pretty good chunk of property. And then Lake McKenzie runs, you know, it's about an acre, acre and a half. Just to give you some frame of reference.
Right. And so my thought was, is that do any of those parks need to be expanded to get to the size you would like them to be at for a dog park? So otherwise, I would suggest that if the pump house wasn't quite as large as we wanted it to be, but we had land there that we could expand onto, maybe putting money into expanding the boundaries of that dog park so that you do have adequate space. But not necessarily throwing a bunch of amenities into it, but expand on it so you have the amount of space that you want.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that the city-owned ones, meaning Lake McKenzie and Morad, I think are sufficient, and they kind of got their own niche, if you will, you know, because Morad's kind of like that roam-free, lots of wooded area, but maybe if you have like a small show dog, you probably don't want to go to Morad, you know, because it's probably got some thistle bushes and stuff like that around, and then Lake McKenzie's a little bit more amenity friendly, meaning it's got watering dishes and a trail that people can walk around as their dogs play and stuff. And I would say that, you know, it is fenced in, but I would say it's a good enough size. You know, could it always be bigger? Yeah, but you or I, you know, no one's going to be able to throw a ball all the way across it and go over the fence. You know. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Of course, everybody knows I've been advocating for this, and the dog parks, I've taken my dogs, both of them, to each one of them. And I've talked to numerous of people regarding the dog parks. And the biggest issue is to remember when we did the ordinance, the leash law, it wasn't just everywhere in the city of Casper, other than those now dogs have to be on a leash. Prior to that, it did have to be a leash or voice command. We took away that voice command, so those people that go to that park that throw the ball and call their dog back and was under voice command, we took that away from them, especially those that have, as I've heard Councilman Huber says, the foo-foo dogs. But the golden retrievers and the long-haired ones, Morad Park and Lake McKenzie and the Tate Pump House, dogs walk out of there with knotted fur, thorns in their feet, things like that. And there's no way to prevent it, and I know that. And you're under your own discretion taking them. But those people who have taken them to the park, Washington Park or wherever, let them out their gate, throw the ball a couple of times, put them back in their yard, we eliminated that completely to allowing that. And that's why I do advocate that we need a grassy area. With that being said, do we need the fanciest, danciest thing? No. Question regarding this module, you said North Carolina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
But what are their dog parks like? Are they like Lake McKenzie? Or are they like the ones that you're talking about in Paradise Valley? What type of dog parks when you say 10 minutes away? You got to take that into consideration, I guess, in my opinion, or fenced in grassy areas. And then, so I guess I don't know if you really know that answer.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I don't know that specific answer, but what I can tell you is that what we found mostly is kind of the higher amenity type dog parks is what you see in kind of those more urban areas.
Okay. And then you talked about the grass area and how much maintenance work would go into actual natural grass, like the one at Washington Park, compared to the one you mentioned at PB, which is really expensive.
The artificial.
The artificial. Thinking long term, pay me now, pay me later, either way you're gonna pay, which one would be the least expensive in proceeding lengthwise years down the road? Which one would be more cost efficient to Casper put money into it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would probably say, based on the longevity, which I think the jury's still out being such a new topic, as far as the lifespan of the artificial turf, if you will, that's where I think the answer to your question lies, and I don't think anyone really knows that. But I think it's a great question, because that's in the back of my mind, which is we would almost probably need to allocate twice as much acreage for a grassy area, so we could shut down half of it while it heals up, open up the other half so that it can be used, because they're going to just be, for a grassy area, they're just going to be very hard on the turf.
Right.
And so just on that fact, and the fact that I know a lot of people really like things to look nice, I would probably, in this, if you're asking me today, I would advocate for that artificial turf.
Artificial turf, okay. If we were to look at that, something like that, not necessarily in PV, but wherever, PV of course, because I live there, and it'd be cool to take my dog, but anyways, couldn't that be done in phases? So you wouldn't eat the cost as much as what you presented up there earlier, presented a whole lot of costs, and it looked, holy crap, we're never gonna be able to budget that in. Couldn't we do it phases in that area, that it would be less?
Absolutely. We certainly could. I think that the key, Mr. Mayor and Councilman, would be is that we follow through with whatever that commitment looks like, meaning if we commit to this list of 5 amenities, if you will. We gave you kind of a worst case scenario. Then you get up $750,000 and it's like, oh my gosh, you know.
Right.
But we want to give you everything, and we could value engineer it after that.
Okay.
And then I totally see where you're going with the phasing. I think it could totally be done, but there would be some things like when you get to like parking, maybe some place for people to walk adjacent to their pet, and some fencing that would probably have to be done in a phase 1 automatically.
Right.
And then you start talking about a pond feature, you know, water feature or something, or a playground or something else. We could definitely look at different phases.
Okay. So, I guess, appealing to you guys, I like, of course, the one by the ecology. I mean, I agree with you, Councilman Friel, that we don't, an acre, quarter would be plant suffice for there. But again, if I could tell you guys anything, we took away the voice command in grassy areas. If we could at least give the community a place to take them without necessarily worrying about the thistles or more dog maintenance, putting our community members that like their dogs, making them pay more money to put into their dogs because this is all we have. I'd like to see more, something else also.
My reaction is, before we did the ordinance change, essentially all of our parks were dog parks. I mean, they were being used for frisbee playing and, you know, because of this voice control option. And if it's true that dogs running around in a park would turn the park into dust, then all of our parks would be dust. And the reason it's not is it's dispersed. So, I'm not a dog guy, but I agree that we did take something away and we should give some grassy areas. And I'm not convinced that that's an absolute, I mean, I don't know for a fact that if we were to designate a portion of PV Park or any other park and just leave it with natural turf, that it would turn into a disaster area in short order. I guess I'd like to experiment on that and see if that were the case. Because I'm sort of agreeing with Mike that we should have more areas, not have them be, you know, geographically isolated. And as far as fencing is concerned, people bring their dogs to Washington Park and City Park and Mike Cedar Park. Those areas aren't fenced. So I don't understand the demand, the need to fence every area that we designate, because that's an expense. And, you know, it hasn't been a problem until we said, put your dog on a leash because, you know, people can be afraid of that or get hurt. But if you knew that an area of the park, or if we took a whole park, let's say City Park, and say, this park, we allow dogs to run free. Well, if I go into City Park, I see the sign, I know that there's gonna be dogs running loose. I can go to another park if I want to. Okay, but I think we should explore the use of our grassy areas and not necessarily fence them, but just signage and some way to mark off and say this is that area. And I don't know how I'll go about that, but I agree, you can't play frisbee at Moorhead Park. You know, it's just not there. And so the other thing I'm concerned about that you hear from people is when you do have a dog like Sunday, they don't want to go to Moorhead Park. Because they're going to get attacked by some, you know, German Shepherd, or they've had that experience, and I think we should try to create some spaces for smaller dogs that where and it wouldn't need to be as big a space, where maybe a third of an acre is set aside, and that's, you know, your dog has to be under 20 pounds or something like that. So, I'm in favor of doing the park on the east end, and I'm in favor of doing some kind of a trial, or with whether it be a PV or at Washington Park, but without spending a bunch of money on pea gravel and wood chips and all these other things, to just see what happens. And if you come back a year from now and say, well, they ruined this section of the park, and you know, we better not do any more of this, fair enough. But I don't know, I guess I'd like to see that happens first. That's my reaction. Steve?
Just a real quick question, now that you brought that up, why do we fence off those designated areas?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I like that question, because I think, to me, acting within the spirit of what we heard as staff with regard to the ordinance, meaning the dangers of a dog running free or whatever, to us it just made sense that you would, and I think industry practice has kind of established that, you know, if you want to avoid kids getting bit or even an animal running up on you unexpectedly and scaring you or your child, which is what we did here from the public, then the fence is what creates that barrier to act within the spirit of the ordinance. That's kind of how I would couch it, but it is totally up to council to, if you just want us to, we talked about that as well, just signing some things or certain hours of, you know, from 4 to 6 on Monday through Friday is dog friendly area. We did talk about all those iterations, but I think that you as council were wrestling with those two different ideas, and we never really probably just came up with this is the direction, which I'm more than happy to take this evening or in the future.
Mike?
Mr. Mayor, I agree with everything that you said, except for that I think you just got completely lost when you started talking about not having fences. Because I really feel strongly that these areas should be fenced off, that you know, maybe they don't need to be 6-foot fences, maybe even 3-foot fences, just to delineate the area.
I'm for
So,
delineation.
I
I don't know what it would consist of, but go ahead.
But with that exception, I agree with everything that the mayor said. But I really think that fencing these areas would be, you know, the minimum thing, just so that people all know that, and so that there's some element that the animal's going to be restrained in there, and not running out in the street, not running across the street to say hello to someone that might not want to say hello to them.
What kind of guidance do we want to give our staff at this point? Are we okay with moving forward with the plan that we developed on the east end?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, like an acre in size, thereabouts?
What did you think, Steve?
My
We were
suggestion
talking-
would be if it requires, if an acre, a half acre to an acre would be a good amount of space, and I would say you do an acre, I would suggest fencing it. And then with whatever money is left over, I think we talked about a parking lot and whatever else. I mean, I would defer back to whoever's the expert on that to make the right decision as to what would be best for that park. But I mean, if the funds are there, you might as well utilize them and make the park of it.
Mike, then Ken.
Yeah, and I agree with what Councilman Friel's saying, but I'd also like to see the idea of maybe taking a quarter of the west half of City Park, for instance, and fencing one corner of that, and have a small dog park, you know, a grassy area, small dog park there, or Nancy English Park, or some of those other parks that you know, that are grassy parks, that if you want to take your foo-foo dog, and I don't use that in a derogative way, but you know, your fancy little dog.
I have a foo-foo dog.
Yeah, okay.
Ken?
Teacup poodle.
Then we gotta move on, guys.
Well, I can touch bases with you with some ideas later, so I'm fine with that.
Should we just start with this East Side Park and then leave the topic open as far as, or do you want to actually move forward with this, one of the Washington Park or the Paradise Valley option? Ray?
I mean, I made this is where I'm at, but I would say that we do move forward with the east side, because I think we've established that. And I think we can table rest of the council gets together to have that conversation of what the rest of that looks like. I'm open to that, the council is too,
Later.
at a later date.
Steve?
I agree with what Ray just said.
Well, but if
Because
there's
if
some
you're waiting
ideas-
until next year, then nothing would happen. Of course, this part's gonna take a little while to put together too, isn't it, Tim? I mean,
Yeah, correct, Mr.
Ken?
As far as if what you just said, wait a year to talk about these other parks being established, I disagree with that. I know that we're looking at the budget coming up, and I think we need to set it so the citizens of Casper knows that we're not just moving on an undeveloped area again, but we are looking at developing grassy areas or multiple parks for those people and figure that out in the budget for this year. Personally, I know we keep coming back to it, but I do think we need to move on it sooner than later.
Carter's got a whiz-bang solution that's gonna take care of all of this.
I'll let you be the judge of the whiz-bang nature of the suggestion, but what we could do is, and I know Councilman Huber might disagree with this approach, but we could certainly set aside some money with regard to a placeholder in the capital budget, entitle it Dog Parks, which will allow us at least to have some resources to talk about as we move forward into the year and come to a conclusion later with regard to how those resources should be expended. And yeah, and I am referring to the 250 that we had set aside for the quad lift design. That it appeared that the majority of the council was in favor of removing from the agenda, capital agenda.
So, okay, we'll put a line item in there and how we spend that we'll figure out later. And then for now, we'll just put that east side on.
You bet.
Are you okay with that, Ken? And then we can still talk about this and come up with some other plan to try some other area, whether it's Washington Park or Paradise Valley or City Park or somewhere else. But I do feel a responsibility to the people who had legitimate complaints, I guess, about the change to mandated leashing of your dog. And to give them, we promised them that we would give them some alternatives.
Mayor, very quickly, I would just say, Tim, I think that you've carefully listened to our comments, and I would just ask that, with all of what we've said in mind, if you can come up with some ideas and some places and some things, and some dollars, some dollar figures for doing things, to implement what we've all talked about. I'd like to see something like that,
Yeah.
and I trust.
We've kind of done that. There's two
Yeah.
options, so.
Well,
Well, I mean, with
2
more
weeks
options.
ago, he had like 4 different spots in Casper. You emailed us about, because Wham took over, we were supposed to discuss that, but you sent us like 4 of different spots in the city, right? I thought you also had over, I thought you had more than that, because you talked about the school, or I thought there was a part, where they got the bridge that goes over by the mall. What school is that? Verta James, you had that on there. I thought you had some other ones from places.
So, Mr. Mayor,
And
Council.
then we really have to move on, guys.
Yep. A previous iteration, our first iteration, talking about dog parks, we had a whole laundry list, probably closer to a dozen different places that could be potential sites, and then we took council direction, kind of whittled it down, and then, just looking for more direction, which is the purpose of tonight.
Why don't we just plan on talking about this again in 6 months? How's
No
that?
problem.
We'll get the east side one going, and we'll have that line item in the budget, and then we'll visit it again, and we'll see how this summer went, and if there's a strong demand for us to get some grassy areas in addition to the east side part.
If, or we will.
Well, we will, 6 months.
Okay, I was gonna say if that, I'm not okay with that. So, okay, I'm good.
Right, but we'll live what we got this summer, basically.
And
Okay.
put aside a placeholder, Mr. Mayor, is that
Yes.
right? Okay,
Yes.
we will do
Is that
that.
okay with everyone okay with that? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thumbs
On-
up.
Oh, sorry. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about all of this? Since we
No, I actually just listened, and basically everything that I was going to comment or ask got commented or asked along the way, so I'm good.
Okay, good enough. On to annexation recommendation.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is a follow-up discussion to a discussion we had a number of weeks ago pertaining to annexation. We promised you that we would bring back a draft resolution as well as a recommendation to start probably a series of several recommendations pertaining to areas of annexation, subject areas that we would propose for your consideration. And so this too is a two-headed discussion this evening under the topic of annexation. The first part that I'd like to tackle is with regard to the resolution that we would propose for your formal consideration. The resolution is really meant to reflect the understanding and practice that has been adopted by the city, if you will, for a number of years and constitutes the makeup of agreements that we've entered into with a number of neighborhoods around the community, et cetera, et cetera. And the basic premise of the resolution that we would ask you to support is primarily twofold. One of which is that indeed when a property comes forward that is from outside the city limits and they want to annex and they're effectively requesting annexation, we would suggest that the resolution require in the agreement that we would enter into this subject area, whatever area that might be, that indeed they would agree to annexation when the council determines in its wisdom that annexation is appropriate. So as a condition of taking those utilities, as a condition of considering services from the city, they too would agree to annex when this group says, hey, it's time to annex, kind of a thing. And they would effectively be waiving their right to protest and to say we're not going to do it and all those kinds of things. But again, generally that's when they are requesting the city to annex into the community and want utilities and those kinds of things. The second part of this is with regard to what is very typical for cities and towns to deal with when it comes to annexation or kind of growing around portions of their extra territory neighbors, is that of the improvements that need to be brought up to whatever standard. It is typical for cities and towns to require that those standards be at the cost of the subject area. We have that in here, but we also have in here the caveat that council may or may not require that particular neighborhood or geographic area or whatever to bring certain elements of their infrastructure up to standard, or they may require that to be a condition of annexation. In any case, while that portion of the agreement will deal with those kinds of things, we do not intend to remove council's ability to make those decisions pertaining to improvements of infrastructure, whether it be streets, whether it be sidewalks, whether it be lighting, whatever the case may be. The other thing that I think is important to note is that there are times where council or the city in general will need to negotiate with a particular landowner as it pertains to annexation and or gaining access to land that they hold that we might have easement interests in or whatever. This resolution would allow for the flexibility when it's needed to negotiate with folks when they have something that the council needs or that the city needs in order for the expansion, utilities to take place, streets to be laid, or anything of the sort. And so the resolution does allow and provide for the fact that the city may need to enter into a negotiation from time to time to further the needs of the city and and provide a resolution and a win-win for the landowner in question as well. So that is what we would propose. Again, this is a practice that has been going on for a long time and is reflective in many of the annexation agreements that we have out there. But we've come to understand that there's never really been a formal direction by the council or a council that sets all of those understandings in motion. And so we're hoping to kind of tighten that up, clear that up, and give direction for us moving forward for staff and councils in the future so that it's memorialized and made clear.
It was just a tradition, basically.
Basically, yeah. And certainly a tradition built on common practices, not necessarily directives of the council.
Questions for Carter? Steve?
I guess just to clarify then, so we provide city services to individuals that are not necessarily annexed into the city.
Right.
And we don't require them to be annexed until we decide that we want to annex them.
Correct.
So I guess my question is, why do we do that? Why are we providing city services to somebody that's not a part of the city?
That's a great question, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Friel. 9 times out of 10, if the possibility exists for people to tie on to services, but they may not be contiguous to the city, and in Casper, that actually exists quite a bit because of a regional partnership that we have with regard to providing water and sanitary sewer and those kinds of things. It really is typically an issue of, yep, here's services, they are available and so on, and yes, we want you to be a customer, but in exchange for that, what we would request is that when our borders are contiguous and when the city is ready, we would ask that you also annex upon request. Very standard practice, very typical of a city to do, kind of take that approach. And in our estimation, it becomes a win-win. Because generally speaking, that's a situation where that neighbor has approached the city, has that desire for those services, and for the city, ultimately, it will be advantageous for the city or community to have those folks contributing their part to the services otherwise that we provide that are in one form or fashion being shared at that time.
So Steve, as a realtor now, if I were to buy a property where that agreement is in place, would you have some obligation to research that and tell me about that, so I'm not surprised down the road when all of a sudden the city comes and says, you have to annex? And I said, wait a minute, I bought this property so I don't have to deal with the city.
You should be able to find that out in the title commitment, though, that would tell you whether or not you've been annexed.
So people should know.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I assume that happens, where people say,
absolutely.
wait a minute, that's the last thing I want to do is be part of the city. And now you've grown around me and you say I have to be part of the city, but I didn't buy the property with that in mind. But I assume that happens in the real world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And you're saying with this policy, you're saying, well, that's the deal.
Generally speaking, the agreements make it clear that that understanding transfers with regard to following the ownership of that property. And so we would want to make that clear too, that if indeed this is going to be our formal policy, that would be the practice that we take.
There's the sales tax advantages for us.
Absolutely.
So, Ken?
So a couple questions is, like you mentioned, if we do annex, that is sales tax, so that helps with the 1 cent fund for Casper, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then, just double checking, if we agree to this, would there have to be 3 readings, so people as in, the Green Valley area, right? Is that right? If they, by chance, a group of them said, hey, no, and they wanted to come and say, no, we don't want this, is that gonna be an optional or no? If we approve this?
There's really 2 sides to this discussion tonight. The resolution that we are asking for your approval of does not annex anybody into the community. This is just the memorialization of the direction to staff and potential annexees, if you will, as to what the expectation would be when those neighbors come forward and say, hey, we want to annex. The second part of that discussion tonight is with regard to an area that we would suggest should be a subject for annexation as we move forward. And if you'll recall, the real critical reason that we're approaching annexation and those questions, you know, starting tonight, if you will, actually it started several weeks ago, but is because we're trying to work backwards from the census data being collected, which as we annex neighborhoods and parts of our community and so on, those population figures are accounted for during the census time, which do provide financial benefit to the community, as you mentioned, in the form of sales taxes, as well as property taxes and frankly enterprise fees as well. So,
And correct me if I'm wrong, Carter, but the other part of the reasoning is also, if you're contiguous to the city, there's a high likelihood you're using city roads, city parks, you're gonna call city police, you're gonna be utilizing the city services, but you don't have the obligation that comes with being a city resident.
that's exactly right.
So there's a fairness thing, in my view, if that's correct, that if you are contiguous, you should be part of the city, especially if you're getting our utility services.
For less than what your neighbor is paying for. Yeah, that's exactly right.
But if that grew, if that, I guess I'm just, you mentioned the second part, if they don't want to be, do they have a chance to come and speak to us and say, we don't want it, and then, or is it, we say yes, that's the direction we want to go, they're in whether they like it or they don't?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the answer to your question is a little more complex than a yes or a no. With regard to the Green Meadow subdivision, we'll call it, if we could bring that up on the screen here so you can kind of get a feel for where we're talking about if you're not familiar with it already. That particular area is surrounded by the city on all four sides. And so statute indicates that for those neighbors, the right to formally protest and hold up the annexation process is not theirs to enjoy.
Okay.
On the other hand, if we were only surrounding the subject area by 50% and the rest of the area was county area or whatever, those property owners would have authority, if you will, to reject that proposal. And council would be in the position of essentially going to the community and in question, you know, that annexation area in question, and essentially taking a vote as to whether or not they wanted to come into the community.
Okay.
And so the annexation question is complex. For the Green Meadow area that we are proposing, we pursue for annexation, it is very much less complex because they've been surrounded by the city and are surrounded currently by the city.
Gotcha.
And are prime suspects, in my mind, if you will, for annexation consideration.
So what are you asking us to do tonight? Is to move forward with the resolution to clarify the policy? Are you also asking for thumbs up on moving forward with annexation of this particular area at this time?
I am asking for a twofold request here. The resolution is much easier to move forward and get done and kind of get off our plate, if you will, if council has that. That would be a preparation for a meeting coming up, be one reading, so to speak, and that would be done. The annexation question, however, is much more difficult because the process is longer. We would have the obligation, if council does see that this is a move that we should undertake, of preparing an annexation report, which statute indicates various steps need to be taken in order for that report to be completed. we would bring that forward into a formal discussion with the council. There would be a 3 reading process that, has the form of an ordinance that would bring in the annexation area on a formal, official basis. So the steps aren't as short to take, but nonetheless are ones that council has that authority to do.
So, in keeping with Ken's concern about do the neighbors really want this, would it make sense maybe for us to have a public hearing before we actually had a first reading and give people an opportunity to voice any concerns, pros or cons, and before we move forward, because we obviously have authority to do this whether they like it or not.
Right, but I
But
think we should.
there is a respect component here.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how we should do that, guys, or what Kristen, you have any thoughts on this?
No, I like your idea though of having a public hearing, because I definitely think it'd be best to get some of those comments vented before we move forward.
Other comments, Mike?
I think it might be, I like the idea of having a public hearing, but I think that it's kind of difficult to have a public hearing unless there is a specific proposal that they're talking about. Because and I think that's why, like to do it on a first reading is a good idea. Much better idea, I think, than to just say, well, we're gonna have a public hearing on annexation, and people come in and they think, well, we're gonna annex the whole county, or we're gonna do this, or we're gonna do that, we're gonna invade Cheyenne, or, Glen Rock or something. And, so doing it without having a specific item to talk about, I think is kind of problematic.
To make it clear that we'll do a first reading and that we may step back from that and talk about it some more before we would go forward.
I think so.
Okay. And there'll be a mix of opinions, obviously. Some people will care, some people will care strongly in one direction or the other, so we'll still have to decide.
Right.
Okay, so thumbs up on the resolution?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up on moving forward with the Green, I think it's Green Valley, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Green Valley annexation?
Thumbs up.
Okay. You're not?
I don't know
Okay. All right.
yet. You got 5. So.
Okay, we got it fine. Okay, good enough. Anything else we need to do on that, Carter?
Just to clarify, when you said green annexation, meaning we'll do a public hearing,
we would do what Mike
first
is.
reading, and then with that as a public hearing.
The first reading is always a public hearing.
Perfect, okay.
And we've many times, people think you're just like a freight train gonna go through it, but actually what happens is sometimes in first reading, we hear some things that cause us to rethink
Right,
things.
okay, just making sure we meant that.
Mr. Mayor, Council, that also includes, however, that we need to start taking the statutory steps that allow that annexation to occur, which include the public hearing and the first reading and those kinds of things. But it typically, as I remember, follows the annexation report that creates the plat and those kinds of things that are the necessary vehicles for that first reading to have the appropriate effect. So I want that to be clear. Those are things that we've got to follow from the statutory standpoint that give you a first reading to have.
Well, how about we just have you give us a status report before we actually move to first reading
Sure.
in a work session?
And Councilman Phil.
Well, I was gonna ask, in that process you're talking about actually has 3 readings to it, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
That's exactly.
I'm all for moving forward in the direction of what you said, because you still have 3 readings, so.
But it may take a little while to get these preliminary steps done before we could even
Yes,
go to
sir.
first reading. Okay. Well, let's plan on just having another discussion like this so you can tell us how things are going forward and whether it's time to actually move
Perfect.
forward and just make sure so it doesn't hit us all all of a sudden we're on first reading for this thing.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. You betcha.
All right. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fire station number 5 and Beverly Street property.
Mr. Mayor, we potentially could make up some time here with regard to where we might be, although we're quite ahead, aren't we?
We're doing all right.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good
Make
here.
it even better.
That's right. The issues pertaining to the bids that have been submitted, indeed are, in my opinion, fairly clear cut. You've got one property that had received a number of proposals. The highest bid is well above the appraised value, and our recommendation would be that we move forward. And in that particular case, that would be to Armand and Catherine Morris for the $220,020.20. And so with council's blessing, we could make that deal happen.
Are we okay with that? They were the high bidder, above appraised value. Okay. Kristen?
Thumbs up.
Okay, good deal.
So congratulations to the Morris family.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what you do with the place.
We're very excited.
Clean it up, make it look a little better.
Nice. Very good. Very good.
Exciting. Plant some flowers, mow the grass.
Good deal. All
I
yours.
do have a question about there was a plaque on the inside of the fire station just to the left of the door that established when the fire station was funded, who are the members of the city council, and those kinds of things. Is that sign still there?
I thought it still was. Myself, you all.
If it's not, I would like to have it so we can frame it and leave it in the residence. And then on the
That's
exterior of the building, just to the right of the front door, there used to be a 1 cent funded plaque that has been removed. And if we could have that as well to post inside the residence, because I understand you may not want it displayed anymore publicly, but we would like to have some kind of a, what it was before we obtained it, wall.
Nice.
And if not, we get it.
We do.
Yes, I believe so.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if you're okay with that, we can furnish that back to the property owners, the new property owners, and do those kinds of things.
Great. Awesome.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
Okay, good.
Very good.
Okay.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you, congratulations. That's great.
On
Thanks.
to the problematic.
On to the problematic one, that's right. With the Beverly Street property, which is, you all know, is a former site of some of our ball fields. The appraised value is $1.2 million. The proposed value, if you will, for purchase was $487,872. And as you all know, that is less than half of what the appraised value is for that property. I feel reluctant to recommend that as a purchase price, but the reality is the bid did not stipulate that the bidder had to present an appraised value. So I would suggest you have the flexibility, one way or the other, with regard to the purchase of this property, or the sale, I should say, of this property. My suggestion is that that's a little light than what we anticipated, and I'm not sure I could feel good making that recommendation.
Question. Staff have any idea why we weren't getting more bids on that property? Is there some problem with it we don't know about?
What if I have Liz? Liz, you want to address that?
Your Honor, members of council, there was interest through all the public process, because we got a lot of calls on it. I do think that the price tag, I think even if people had offered $1 million, that is significant, but there was interest in the commercial aspect. The one that came through was for a affordable senior housing development, which would be wonderful. But again, staff believes that if we're gonna look at that, which is a need and one of our council goals, we do have some local housing organizations that might want that same opportunity. And if you're gonna be open to selling it for $3.50 a square foot, I think we would want to look at offering that to some of our local groups too. But as Mr. Napier said, staff would not feel comfortable at this point on that. I think there's some other opportunities out there, whether it's commercial or residential. We can have both in that designation.
what would we do at this point then if we reject it? We would just contact some of those, the housing authority or other groups?
Actually, Mr. Mayor, you have a variety of options that you can consider. I would suggest that your first step be to formally reject all bids for this property, which of course is just one. Council then has the opportunity to consider whether or not you'd want to put it back out for bid, whether you would want to put it out for bid with adjustments in the regards to what Liz suggested as to a lower anticipated price, to see if we had local interest in that kind of a price point. Or council could just wait and see when the opportunity might be better later on.
Saw some hands.
Go ahead.
Steve?
So I have two questions. In the request for bids, was there a minimum requirement that was put in there?
No.
And was there any language put in it that it would go to the highest bidder?
Yes. So no to your first question, yes to the second.
But it also said we had the right to reject them all if we didn't like
Does
it.
so that verbiage is under two, that we have the right to reject it?
Isn't that right, Liz? So there was no guarantee that we would accept the highest bid.
Correct.
Okay. Ray, were you,
No, Liz had answered my questions when she was talking.
other questions? Recommendation from staff is to reject and see what else we can do with it.
Mr. Mayor, we do not have a recommendation though with regard to whether or not you want to put it out for a lower price point. I mean, that's certainly direction we would embrace, but not necessarily a part of a recommendation at this point.
And we're pretty confident in this appraisal, Liz? And
Your Honor, members of council, we've had this appraised 3 times in approximately a 7 or 8 year period. It's always been about 1.1 to 1.2 million. So yes, and we've had it appraised by 3 different appraisers.
Okay. Steve?
Well, I would say if that verbiage is in there that we have the right to reject it, then that I would vote for rejecting it. That is low. And then secondly, would we have the option of reaching out then if, in fact, you have a senior, I'm assuming this other housing is from somebody outside the community, would we have the option to reach out to locals and offer it to them, or does it have to go back out to another bid process, or?
We'd have to bid.
I would say it should go out for another bid process with regard to the stipulations that you would include,
And maybe
whatever
put-
that might be.
I'm sorry, maybe put some kind of minimum in there this time, so.
Sure.
Other comments, questions? Thumbs up on rejecting the bid? Okay, good enough.
Unless there's other direction on another bid attempt, or leave it at this point for now.
I'm just gonna go with Liz's suggestion that we reach out to some local groups and see if they want to submit a bid, and I'm always uncomfortable when you only have one bidder for a property. That's just not how you want this to work, and why we didn't get more is, how many did we get on the other house, like 8 or 10? On the fire stations.
So if we do have other people that show interest in it at that point, then we put it back out for bid, but for right now, it just sets.
I think that's the best way to do it. If indeed there does present other interest, we should probably take the formal step of going again and adjusting the language accordingly. That's all right.
So do we, if we're gonna do that, do we wanna do a minimum?
Well, we can,
Discuss it.
but we're not giving you direction to put it out to bid just yet, right?
Correct.
So we'll have a chance to talk about this and put the specifications in at a later time.
Gotcha.
But yes, I think we probably should.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this? Okay, let's move forward. Historic preservation and building codes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we put an analysis, if you will, with regard to the existing building codes as well as what historic buildings typically allow for those buildings that fall under that category. I'm not exactly sure what direction council wanted to go, and so that really is the primary impetus behind our bringing this forward tonight in that council has certainly expressed a desire to have a discussion about historic buildings, about old buildings, and so existing buildings, and being potentially reused for purposes that developers might bring forward, whatever. But I'm not sure what changes to code that you would like to suggest or like to talk about or consider for additional analysis. And so I guess that would be my hope that with regard to what council learns tonight and or sparks a desire for this evening, that you all would give us that direction. We can provide that further analysis, or we can tell you what we know, and council may not have any direction beyond what's in place now. So we're open to whatever it is that council would like us to do by way of homework or holding steady, whatever that might be.
This is a rollover from previous council. I don't know if you folks were paying attention, Kristen and Steve and Ken, but I believe the context of this was the First Street building.
Yes,
and
sir.
the fire code issue there with that was preventing the owner to move forward with his building plans, and claimed there would be a prohibitive cost to meeting code.
Right.
And so the question came up, well, is there some way to identify a district of town where buildings were built according to code at the time, codes changed, and now they can't be utilized because they changed hands, and now they have to meet code, which is one of the things you learn in this job, is that it's fine for a building to be out of code as long as it doesn't change hands. As soon as it changes hands, then it has to meet if I'm saying this correctly, and so that's how this came up. Was there some way to make it possible for someone to purchase a building that has code violations, and in this case it was a fire escape, and allow some exceptions to those codes so that the building can actually be developed.
Mr. Mayor, if it would help the discussion, we are prepared to provide some analysis in a number of directions. We could certainly start with regard to the First Street property, if that would help. And for that, if it pleases the council, I'd ask either Chief Silberg or Chief Harshman to help us walk through that a little bit, maybe even Mr. Elston, whatever you prefer.
Oh, well, I think we just have an open-ended discussion about this, because you're right, we did ask for this to be put on the agenda. So, would you folks care to talk, tell us what the problems are and how serious they are? Okay.
Mayor, council members, I'll start off, and then certainly Chief Harshman and Nelson, the building codes, can add to the discussion. It's a complicated issue when you're looking at a specific building, so I'm going to try to keep it generalized to really any building existing, whether it's designated historic or not. Typically, or generally across the country, fire and life safety codes aren't exempted in any building. What the process is, and Dan can probably speak to more to an existing building that has an existing occupancy and use, can continue in that use. However, new codes do start to apply to them with, I guess, considerations that it is being used. What triggers new code applications would be the total reuse of it, change of ownership, use of occupancy, things like that. So that's kind of the starting point of when these new codes apply. From there, it kind of gets into whether it's an existing building or a historic building, life safety codes, again, are still always there and can't be exempted. So there are ways we can modify or take I guess, like things, materials, things like that, and building codes can look at that and evaluate that. But when it gets down to fire suppression, alarm notification, egress, things like that, those aren't ever lifted, again, because of the city's exposure to liability, our exposure to liability in the community. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Chief Harshman as far as what has been done in the past in this community with existing buildings when we have a change of use or occupancy, and how that code applies as we move forward with new codes.
Mr. Mayor, Council. I think our community can be very proud of the efforts that have gone into a collaborative effort between property owners and code officials. We have seen many, many buildings within the city of Casper that you could consider historic, maybe not meeting the definition per se of historic, but older buildings within the community that have been repurposed, if you will. But in every case, those buildings have met the life safety requirements of the code. There are certain things within the existing building code that can be allowed to continue, but they're not life safety. They don't involve egress, they don't involve fire protection systems, alarm systems. An example would be if you have a historic building that has a very ornate railing. And maybe that railing is only 38 inches tall. And the code would say, by today's code, if you're to build that, that would be a 42 inch. There are the ability within the code to look past that. However, there is not the ability to look past egress from a building or fire protection systems or alarm systems in those buildings. And in every case in the city where older buildings have been rehabbed, if you will, those were never questioned. The contractors knew because they had employed architects and engineers to provide that guidance to them prior to the beginning of any construction. And they're very successful, and they're all over our community. The old fire station would be an example. The Wyoming bank building that is now affordable housing. That building went through amazing things to meet the code, including cutting a stairwell through each of those floors to provide a second means of egress. And so, although the historic aspect gives us some wiggle room in some aspects when it comes to life safety, and you would not want to be in a building that you were not able to exit from in an emergency. Fire protection systems are in place to protect residents long enough to get out of the structure and at the same time preserve the structure. And so what we find when we go to those kinds of buildings, if there is an incident where we used to have to haul hose lines and break doors down and all that sort of stuff, we now go in with squeegees and mops and take care of the situation. So that's just kind of it in a nutshell. There are some exemptions, but not when it comes to life safety.
If we were to talk about the building at First and Center, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong there, the problem there is there's an interior stairway and then an exterior stairway, and the fact that the secondary stairway is exterior to the main building, that's what makes it not count as a second means of egress.
Well, that wouldn't be the whole picture, Councilman. In the larger view, our frustration with that building is that from day one we've asked for architectural drawings to have the owner of that building decide what they want to use the building for, and to have an architect give us a set of stamped plans. And an architect will, of course, take into account all of the code provisions. That's their job. If you want to find a code expert, go to an architect, because they're in the code books even more than we are. And so they provide that guidance. And that building, we have not received stamped plans. We've asked for them. Mr. Elston, the chief building official, has asked for them. We have asked for them. No plans have ever been forwarded to us. It's not just the stairway. The stairway is just a little piece of the overall puzzle. It's an alarm system. It's a sprinkler system. It's electrical upgrades that they've already started. It's a multifaceted thing. That's been a source of frustration for us. We like to see buildings reused. We like to see productive use. It brings in tax dollars that pay for our services. So we're all for that, but it has to be done in a safe, code compliant manner.
Well, but playing the devil's advocate, if I'm the owner of that building, and then I go to an architect, and the architect says, oh, well, that's gotta have 2 interior stairways, you know, that one stairway's exterior, so it's gonna cost you $1 bazillion to do that. Well, I'm not gonna pay that architect to draw something up that's financially not there for me. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with that, because if the architect just says, well, this is what the code is, and this is what you'd have to do, and then I wouldn't pay him to draw things up either.
Well,
And I'm playing the devil's
yeah,
advocate.
we can't get off square one without those drawings. That's where the whole process starts. And without us understanding what the owner wants to do with the building, we can't guess, we can't move forward, we can't design it for them.
Well,
So it leaves us kind of
really
between a rock and a
appreciate
hard
that,
place.
but the problem that I see is that if it's, as you say, that an architect's gonna say, well, this is what's required, that then, you know, you're not between a rock and a hard place, you got two rocks sitting there, you know.
Mr. Mayor and Council, there were several tours through that building with prospective buyers prior to the person that bought it. And they decided not to purchase the building. They were explained the egress requirements. This building, even with the stairwell that's there, that does not meet the egress requirements. The fire escape does not meet the egress requirements that would be required if you were to include that.
Well,
So,
only because it's outside, or?
it doesn't meet the width requirements or the occupant load. The owner of the building has desired to put a restaurant on the top 2 floors, which is an A2 occupancy, which with the square footage that we have to guesstimate because we don't have the drawings. We originally, in our first meeting with Casper Fire EMS and the building officials and the owner, asked for an egress path and the widths and the measurements of the building, and we have yet to receive that. We did not ask for the architectural stamp drawings. We just said give us that as ground one to where we can start a process to see if this is feasible. And we were able to receive that at that time, and the person who was doing the drawings has since backed out of even drawing anything with that owner. The existing building code defines an unsafe building as it reads in part, a structure that are deficient due to inadequate means of egress. And I know that I think this will be the 3rd time it's been repeated, but that's something that we are unable to lessen our restrictions on. Even if we were to want to, we do not have that opportunity to do that.
If that had remained a restaurant and bar like it historically, when it was built, was, would these kind of egress issues be something that would be grandfathered, or would this be something that, you know, the building code would say, no, you have to go in and fix this even though this has been continuously in operation?
I'm unsure when the building was originally built if there was a restaurant out there.
It was.
It was when it was originally built.
Yeah,
and I don't know if the Gladstone was a portion of that.
It was.
So it was.
Yeah,
so the
it
Gladstone
was.
had the
New
second
tower
egress.
for
The Gladstone had the second egress that is now required since it was removed. So that's why we only have the one egress.
I don't know that it was the same height though as that, but anyway
So-
though. But question being, and because part of what I am curious about is what kind of things are something that's grandfathered versus what's a safety issue.
The purpose
that's
of an
so
occupied
extreme.
building not have, Mr. Mayor and Council, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
The purpose of the reason that that an occupied building does not have to be upgraded unless there's a change of occupancy or a renovation, is because if that was not in the code, you would have to remodel your house every 3 years. Actually, every 2 years, because the National Electrical Code is a year off from the building code cycles, which is every 3 years. So I would ask you every 3 years to remodel your home up to the new codes.
Well, but that's not what I was asking. What I was asking is this egress problem. Is it one of those kind of things that is of such an import that, like Chief Harshman said, there are some things that are life safety threats that even if it's an existing use, the building code requires you to go in and say, no, wait a minute, you gotta upgrade this even though it's an existing use.
We have to enforce the codes that are in place, and at this time, if a building is continually occupied and it met the codes at the time that it was built, then we have to just enforce it as that. We cannot go in, we
Okay, so
don't
this
have that
would not-
authority
this
to
would
go
not-
in and tell somebody to
Yeah.
increase their egress
Yeah.
in an occupied building.
Yeah, this would not be something such as a vent hood or something like that, where they can go in and say, no, you have to upgrade that.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that's what.
I want to follow up and then I'll get to you guys. So, could you remind us of your name? I'm sorry.
I am Dan Alston.
Okay, Dan. I knew that. But Dan, so would it be fair to say we have an unknown number of buildings that have similar code violations but have been in continuous use, but we don't have exposure because we haven't inspected them because they were in continuous use? Is that a fair statement?
No, I think the most part, our buildings mostly have the egress that is required. They have annual fire inspections by Casper Fire EMS. I know in this particular building, that building owner went and cited some other buildings and some measurements, but he did not take into consideration the fact that they had the secondary egresses that made them meet the code requirements.
Stand corrected then. Who was Ken? And then Steve.
Guess direction is being asked or requested, but I'm not following what direction is being requested of. I guess I'm kind of confused. I apologize, but I've heard the first straight. But what is needed?
This is for information purposes only.
I have historical preservation, building codes, direction requested on our paperwork.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be
I
happy
was
to
just
tackle that.
go ahead and then we'll get to you, Steve.
The, if indeed council wants to evaluate changes to the ordinance or whatever as it relates to historic buildings or existing building code, then what I would ask is that we get those recommendations, give us the opportunity to take them back and evaluate their, what options might exist for those particular suggestions, and then bring you back some recommendations. I think as it relates to life safety kinds of things, such as egress and whatnot, our flexibility with regard to local amendment to remove those kinds of requirements are going to be fairly limited. And so I would ask that you give that caveat some thought as you consider ordinance changes that you might be interested in.
Steve?
I don't see that we necessarily need to make any kind of an ordinance change. I mean, it is what it is. In the situation that we talk about at first and center, that's buyer beware. He should have done his due diligence in the first place, looking at the building to see what would have gone into that to make you bought it, and now it's being required of you to make all these changes, and if it's gonna cost you money, you should have thought about that before you wrote the paycheck. I've been involved in several renovations of houses, old homes in this town, that we know ahead of time going in there that the moment we bust that wall open, we're replacing everything in that house, and we know that. And we don't buy a house if we know that at the end of the day, the cost is gonna outweigh what the profit's gonna be in the end. So I don't see this as an issue. I mean, this is just common sense that if the building becomes empty, you buy a building, you're gonna have to bring it up to code of where it's at and follow what the code is. I don't see where we need to be having this discussion.
Chief?
Councilman. I was just gonna add on the city manager's comments, and being new to Wyoming, it's my understanding, I'll certainly look to the city attorney for a follow-up. In Wyoming, the state fire marshal's office adopts the current 2018 fire code. As a local jurisdiction, if we do not adopt it, then essentially they come into play to enforce and adopt the code. So I guess I would caution that if we are gonna go in and start exempting certain things, definitely life safety, that the fire marshal's office is going to come in to that owner and say, no, it's not gonna happen. So we would put ourselves in a difficult position, both from the fire marshal and legal aspect, as well as our own city liability.
Sounds like there are certain buildings that just aren't cost effective to renovate if they have those kind of problems. So, but I agree with you, Steve. He probably heard it from his own architect. Probably what happened, because you're saying they know the codes, and the architect said you can't do what you want to do here. So.
And I just have one more question, I think, of you, Dan. So in that building in particular, being as we've been discussing it, if you have an owner of a building like that that has refused to bring you plans that you've asked for, has started doing renovations to the building anyways, but is not complying with anything that's been asked, do you have the opportunity of revoking that building permit and stopping everything altogether?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Creel, there's been no building permit issued on that property. He was given the opportunity to renovate the first floor and he was going to put in a sandwich shop. And I believe, Casper Fire, correct me if I'm wrong, we thought he could use the second floor also.
That's correct.
And he was given those opportunities and he did not move forward with those. I do know that there was some preliminary work done there, but there have been no permits pulled at this time.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Sounds like we need to back our staff on these things. And, okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Okay. WHAM resolutions.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have been working on some drafts that we've submitted for your consideration within the last week or couple weeks. And we're wondering if council would be ready to give the thumbs up on what we've proposed so far. If you'll recall, the items that we have suggested some draft language for resolutions include the topics of getting included in the state of Wyoming insurance, sales tax collection errors and mitigating factors, the stormwater utility concept, and anti-discrimination legislation. What we would hope we could do tonight is take your direction with regard to any of these, changes you might have with regard to any of them, and allow us to submit these on behalf of the city of Casper so that WHAM can prepare its next step, if you will, pertaining to what I hope will be adopted direction for the entire WHAM body.
Or other direction from council on other resolution topics, because it's not too late to come up with other topics of concern. This is essentially our lobbying voice in the legislature.
So, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like, we could go one by one, or we could do whatever you think.
Are we good with these particular ones? And of course, there will be a number of others that will come from other municipalities.
So I looked at all of them and they looked good to me.
Okay, any other questions?
Pretty extensively.
Okay.
I'm just gonna double check. It looked like that got fixed.
Actually, in the option I had or was given, it was not resolved. Still needed to have the chapter 3 reference. And that's the very last paragraph. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I apologize, guys. Just wanted to clarify. So down below it says resolved Title 9, Article 2,
Which one are you on, Ken?
The insurance, sorry.
Alright.
That, it's just it needs to have the chapter 3, I guess, in there, to be more specific.
Okay.
In that bottom paragraph. is what you're
Yes.
Okay, is that okay with everyone to add that language? Yep. Okay. All right,
Yep.
and then just by way of reminder, there will be opportunities to propose other resolutions right up to the June meeting. If there are other things that we would like to see happen in our legislature in the upcoming session, the earlier we submit a topic or a proposed resolution, the better. But we do have some time if other ideas come to mind or people feel strongly that we should be pushing for something. So, okay, I'll thumbs up on these three. Okay. All right.
Thumbs up.
Great. Okay. And we're on to agenda setting for 4 weeks from today. And that's a meeting I will miss, so I'm gonna let the rest of you cherry pick topics off our list.
28th, right?
This will be the 28th. It's actually 5 weeks from today since we don't have a meeting next week. Unless you all wanna just come here anyway and.
I was gonna make that motion.
Just hang out.
And I was gonna require all the staff to be here as well. So I knew they'd want to.
So what looks,
Was there anything pressing that the staff needs done?
anything you wanna make sure we discuss on the 28th, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we might have some pretty good information to discuss with you regarding the Plains RFP.
Ooh, I'd hate to miss that. Well, okay.
That would certainly be one
Okay.
option. The annual audit. Did you talk-
I'm okay with missing that.
Let's see. Did we docket that? I think we did, didn't we? I guess not. The annual audit would be another one. And reallocation of countywide consensus. That should be an interesting discussion. That we wouldn't want to leave you out on either for the 28th.
What other things look interesting to people? I think we've got a little bit of time left on the 28th. What's
The deal with the camping ordinance?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we have found some inconsistencies with respect to that ordinance that probably need to be reconsidered and brought up to current consideration. Mr. Attorney, do you have real specifics in mind at this point that you'd like to address on that?
Mayor, Council, we had looked at this and we had a couple of prosecutions come up. And I'd seen that the current ordinance is just very, very broad. It would prohibit kids from going out camping in their backyard. It would prohibit truckers from going into Flying J and camping in their sleep. It's just that broad. So we wanted to make it more specific, and I think that would make it more easy to enforce, so you could have some effective enforcement. At the same time, residents would probably have some possible constitutional challenge along the way.
I'm just curious.
Kristen, any topics that are of interest to you that you'd like to see worked on the 28th? I think you guys should talk about parking on the parkway as well.
I thought about that since Walt will be back.
We should talk more about dog parks.
Come on, Mike.
What else?
I'm not sure that we would have anything in the top section ready to roll by that point, which I would suggest would probably come, at some point, perhaps after the adoption of the budget in June. And maybe some of these others wouldn't have that timeliness issue either necessarily at that point. I would like to take up the finance policies discussion, probably post-budget as well, but not too long after the summer if we could at all get that in at some point in that time.
Trail project options.
That, Mr. Mayor, was something Miss Emery referenced tonight. I was anticipating we'd get more of a discussion than what we had this evening pertaining to their ideas for 1 cent 16, because their contract will, envision those kinds of projects, I'm hoping. So I think we need a part 2 of that conversation prior to council feeling good about adopting that contract and signing off in total.
I mean, you two will be here to advocate for the Fork and Trail access, because that's what that West End extension is all about, is making sure that those 2,000 or 3,000 people have access to the trail system in Ward 2.
But again, that might be
Premature.
for the 28th. I think it would be.
Okay. Well, I mean, is there anything?
But I could ask. Would you like me to ask?
Well, I guess you can. I mean, Steve.
All right, so what do I need to do to bring a topic onto this list?
Just right here.
Just tell you what it is?
Yep.
Okay, so
If you get 5 people to say, yeah, let's talk about it, we put it on the list.
what I'd like to talk about is the condensing unit from the event center is being moved to the ice arena. And it can handle 2 sheets of ice. And we have some dasher boards now. We have another rink essentially that's not in use. It's my understanding we've got potentially some seating left from the event center. So I'd like to have the discussion that means the inside would almost be done, of looking at adding on, potentially adding on to the rec center and adding a second sheet of ice. We're putting a second sheet of ice up. I've had a discussion with members of the Casper Hockey Association that would like to come down and give a presentation to you of their thoughts on it. And I'd also like to look at whatever type of facility we look at putting up there being multi-use, to where you could take one of the rinks down in the off-season and make a multi-use facility that could be lacrosse, indoor soccer, whatever you want. So I'd like to have that discussion.
It's typically been about this time of year, Carter, that I recall, where we would look at our 1 cent revenues and try to project, are we going to have any unallocated? Is it too early to give us those kind of projections? Because that's what that would almost certainly have to be, is
Right.
unallocated 1 cent 16 monies that were above what we anticipated.
Mr. Mayor, probably would be a critical element of the budget delivery in May. We should be able to talk about surplus revenue, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe it, both in the general fund as well as in 1 cent 15.
There'll be no shortage of suggestions, I'm sure, if there is any.
Yeah.
So, but we can put that on the list, it's just a question of how we would fund it, so. Do you wanna wait and see after the budget to see where we sit with the 1 cent 16 before we would talk about what we might spend it on? Cause I'm sure they'll make a strong case for why we need more ice. There's no doubt that we do. It's just a question of where the money comes from.
One of the other things, if I may, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Friel, potentially introduce into the discussion would be the potential for other projects that are coming online that are offering similar services that you're discussing, and maybe by the time we get those user groups put together for a council meeting, we could have that feasibility better understood as well, and that might help the conversation a little bit.
Separate project is what you're talking about.
Right.
And it's the same project. I think you're talking about ice was not part of that.
Right, right. And in that regard, we may have the opportunity to save some project expense if indeed we're not duplicating what they may be offering, should that project ever get off the ground. And that's always a big if, as we all know. So I think it would help to refine the scope potentially, and may be helpful for council if indeed this should come to an agenda.
Well, there's no reason why we can't put it on the list, just to have it there.
Can we potentially put that on a date though to talk?
Well, you know, we can always put things on a date down the road. You know, the drill we're in now is planning 4 weeks ahead. And if with whatever is ready or people are interested in doing. So if you want to pick a specific date and say, well, let's
Well, it
put
just kind of seemed like we were stuck trying to figure out what else we're gonna put on the 28th, so that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, well, we are. We
So
are.
I proposed the 28th, we could talk about some ice.
Well, is that too early for, we can, what I would predict is gonna happen is they would come in and tell us how hard it is to get all of the things done with a single sheet of ice. And we'll all look around and say, well, we agree. And then it's like, what are you gonna do now?
Is it possible, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, if we looked at it for the 11th of June, just to give us a little wiggle room past the budget to have those discussions and maybe put together a much clearer idea of what may be going on in the community, that kind of, that's all right.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'll bring it back up when we go for the June 11th. I'll ask for it to be put on at that time.
Well,
Being
or
that we're doing the 28th today.
we'll put the agenda, in 2 weeks, we'll put the agenda together for
Sure.
the June 11th.
Sure.
So,
That sounds good.
so you wanna talk about the audit on the 28th?
Sure.
Ask Angela if she wants to come back. Talk about camping. Wanna talk about small trailer parking? Okay? How close are we to full?
I'd say we're there. I'd say we're there. Because we're gonna talk about planes also, correct? Or did you wanna wait on that one?
Well, you know, that's just my personal, I mean, I'll listen, you know, but,
You mean over the phone? is
yeah.
what you mean?
Also, well, it depends on, yeah, I should be able to do that. I should be able to do that.
So we got,
Is Plains gonna be, what are we gonna do about Plains? Is the 60 days up?
that would be up by then, correct. Yeah, we will have received, I think on the 14th,
No, it's the 3rd.
the 3rd. Sorry, thank you.
3rd of May. And so are you talking about the 28th being like a final decision on Plains?
It could either be a final decision or it could be a second part. We could entertain the first decision on the 14th, since the bids come in on the 3rd, and do part 2. Because generally speaking, you like to have these things and kind of deliberate a little more and think about them.
Here's what I would suggest. Could we do just a, this is where we sit on the 14th without making any final decisions? And then on the 28th, if you guys happen to get out early, I'd like to remind you all, we will have been here, I think, at least 2 other nights. And it might be nice to have a short work session on the 28th. Unless you disagree, Mr. Vice Mayor. Do you think we've got enough?
So for the 28th, just to be real clear, the audit, consensus, camping, the small trailer parking, potentially the Trails Trust votes, and are we good with a part 2 for planes, and then use the 14th? Because the 14th will be pretty busy also, I think, for part 1.
Pretty full meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't expect you all to change the agenda for me, so. I think that's good. Everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So part 2 for planes or part 1? I'm not sure if I'll.
Part 2.
Part 2, okay.
One's the 14th, right?
Oh, part 1.
If you're okay with that.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll know more after 2 weeks from today, or 3 weeks from today, as to we are moving forward on the 28th.
Right.
Okay.
Perfect.
And we don't have the legislative update here. Can you help me tell them a little bit about the WAM board meeting, Carter? Basically, we met the new director, executive director, and he's all about getting to know everyone around the state. He wants to visit with all of you. and talk about, get some impressions of what's going on in the state and how WAM can be a more effective organization, and answer any questions or take suggestions. And other than that, we worked on our attorney contract, we worked on his contract. It was pretty mundane stuff. I thought we were gonna do more work on resolutions, but that was really deferred to June.
Correct, yeah.
So what else we can do?
Mr. Mayor, the resolutions committee will meet in between that board meeting and the next convention meeting. And hopefully, again, we'll have some opportunity to influence that conversation with the well-drafted resolutions you guys have adopted. The only other thing that I think was covered was adopting the budget that we would forward to the board as well.
And I'm heading to Riverton tomorrow for a Region 4 meeting. So I'll answer that meeting.
I'll be in there.
Well, get on down to Riverton. It's 3 to 7. You get, it's good to meet people around the state that have similar jobs. It's just a healthy thing. Anything else on legislative business, Carter, you can think of?
I don't think so. I appreciate the support for these resolutions. I think it's going to help the conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, let's go around real quick and see if anybody has anything else. Ken, you got anything else?
I don't.
Okay, Ray?
The president of Casper College asked me to hand out, they had just put together an annual report for Casper College, and I wanted to share it with the city council, and I'll get it to the 3, and you too, Kristen, and I'll get you the annual report as well when I see you. But anyway, just wanted me to hand these out, just kind of an overall numbers of how the college looks, its demographics. There's been quite a bit of work that they put into that, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So. And we could went to Carter too.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got, George.
You done droning?
What's that?
Have you done droning yet?
Yeah.
Okay, is that it? Mike?
With reference to the chairlift study at Hogan, I would just note that the current chairlift there is, by my recollection, over 35 years old. I think when you start looking at different assets, mechanical assets like that the city has, I don't know of anything else that we have that's that old. I think we really need to move forward with that engineering study, move along with this. I think it's frankly, I have to say, a foolish decision to put that off any farther.
Okay. Steve?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Well, it's one of the reasons I was hesitant about going to a quad lift, is I think that money should be set aside, because we need a completely new lift somewhere down the road. I don't know how we're gonna get that done. I also want to mention that on the 29th of April, 5 to 7 p.m., this is at the Skelton Energy Institute building, and this is basically a recruiting and information session for potential students in fire science, criminal justice, and paramedic. So this is something we were asked to announce publicly, and encourage anyone interested to attend on the 29th and learn a little bit about those career opportunities and what would be involved in the programs that are available. So it's free, 5 to 7 p.m. on the 29th, which is what, next Monday, right? No,
Yes.
Yeah, what is that called? All right. And if there's anything else, I think we can adjourn.
Sweet.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Look at that, Sean. Hour and 15 minutes.
Good.
Good stuff.
Okay, Kristen, we're all done. Thanks for hanging in there with us.
I think she hung up.
Oh, okay.
She got bored.
No, she's just a
Yeah, you betcha. You betcha.
Right.
Through all that, Mr. Mayor. We got a lot done. No, they did give us, they did give us steps, we'll start the formal steps necessary to get us to the first.
They got it.
The first reading.
No, no.